Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Staffordshire Police and Crime panel meeting, Tuesday, October the 10th, 2:30 in the Oak Room at Staffordshire. My name is Bernard Peters. I'm the chair of this panel. May I welcome the Commissioner and his team and the panel members to this session that is being webcast. Welcome to members of the public, and thank you for your attendance today. So straight to the agenda, if I may. Item 1, apologies.
Thank you, Chair. I've received apologies from Councillors Fitzpatrick and Councillor Lowren. Councillor Lowren has sent her substitute along, Councillor Barron.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Thank you very much. Item 3 on the agenda, minutes of 2 meetings held on the 3rd of July 2023. I assume everyone's read those. May I take them as accepted and I'll sign them off? Any comments? No? Thank you. Item 4 on the agenda, decisions published by the Commissioner, and the following decisions have been published and they're listed on the agenda. Are there any comments or questions related to any of those items? Commissioner?
Afternoon, Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. Just the second item there, the Doxy post, that I believe is the new base for our motorway policing group, and a really very effective location. And really, we've done, I think, an exceptional job there of getting some terrific new modern space, which is perfect for that, managing that really important road network for us. Happy to take any questions on the other items, Chair.
Okay. Are there any questions for the Commissioner on those items? No, thank you. Questions to the Commissioner from members of the public? We've had 2 questions.
From Mr. Riley.
From Mr. Riley. Mr. Riley, you're with us today. Would you like to come to the table? I understand you may have a supplementary question. Commissioner May, is there to the left, please? Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for giving me the time to address the Commissioner. One is a point, actually, in terms of a referral from the Commissioner's office in terms of, I think it was 2 freedom of investigation issues, which were related to other departments, specifically in the police. That's information for my own personal use, basically, if I do that. The question itself was specific to the Commissioner because the ONS data is generalised, and the questions I was asking were actually specific to that office, and I believe it's on them to actually get that information out there so the public can see it as part of transparency, rather than me as a single person going to an FOI and actually requesting that information. So that's just a point I'm making in relation to that. But I have a supplementary question in terms of literally foreign nationals. We've got over 11,000 foreign nationals held in England and Wales, and the response from the Commissioner indicating Staffordshire Police are only required to record offender ethnicity. Would his office direct the Chief Constable to collect data on foreign nationals, bearing in mind the problem Staffordshire has in terms of county line drugs and other serious offending that may be happening in our county? I'm sure the general public would welcome this information if it were available so we could see the impact it has on our local communities. Because of real fears which relate to the recent appeal by Serco on Stafford Court complex and other localities within the county itself.
Okay. Is that your question? Yes. Okay, thank you, Mr. Brown. Commissioner, would you be able to respond?
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Riley, thank you. I imagine it's freedom of information rather than freedom of investigation. And I take your point, actually, that's information that would go to you and not for public domain. That's one of the reasons, Chair, that I have my public performance meetings with the Chief Constable. There's really quite a hefty pack that I put in the public domain of detail, going beyond the headlines of the ONS. And quite often we spend time during those meetings just discussing the nuances around some of that information. It's all available on the website, including the pack. You're very welcome, like everybody else, to watch or sit in on those. And if there's particular areas of data you don't feel you're getting, or you don't feel the public are seeing, I'm very happy to consider putting them into the public domain as well. Around the second point, foreign nationals, I won't direct the Chief Constable. I don't direct the Chief Constable. The Chief Constable's got operational independence, and quite right too. I could consider that in a conversation, but essentially what you're asking for there is something to be recorded that is not an obligation on the police service at the moment. So that would be, I think, a question better posed to our MPs, because they're in a position to influence legislation, influence the Home Secretary on what is being recorded. I think on the perhaps the wider point that you might be seeking to make, at the moment there are a number of locations with migrants in Staffordshire and Stoke-on-Trent, more than our equal share actually. But in terms of incidents for the police, they've been extremely limited. And at the moment, whilst that is being monitored, it's not an area of additional pressure or challenge for the service at the moment, Chairman.
Okay. I'll give you the opportunity to make a comment if you wish.
Just in response to that, really, is the fact that Commissioner's just stated that the figures seem to be very low in terms of the foreign nationals. But if we're not collecting that data, then how do we really know that?
Okay. I don't want to have a protracted debate on this point,
Yeah,
but Commissioner, if you close this out for us.
We could, Chairman, but I take the point. Actually, what I'm referring to there is issues related to the particular locations where we're housing migrants, and those as opposed to the individuals.
Right, thank you.
Nothing further, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, thank you. Item 6 on the agenda is the Police and Crime Plan, the update. Commissioner?
Thanks, Chairman. Right, so we're some months into the Police and Crime Plan. Some of the panel, I'm conscious, are new, might not be familiar with the way I structured the plan 2 years ago now. I'm quite pleased. It's holding up sort of robustly, if you like, in the way that I've done that. And I'll just try and whip us through some of the progress that we've been making. So under the heading of local and responsive, I think the most significant change there was the Chief Constable's introduction of essentially relocalising our police force. So this is chief inspectors in control of their own response and neighbourhood teams back in each of our localities. It's been well received. Demand on the service is considerably increased, but despite that we're maintaining response times. And I think the point made in 411 is really important, that generally we're responding more often with response officers, which means the neighbourhood teams and others, including roads policing in many cases, are focused on their specialist areas of work. So I'm really encouraged that that new model is not only more local, more visible, but actually we're maintaining some pretty high standards of response despite the increasing demand. I do not believe that's reflected everywhere else. Police uplift, this has been great news for Staffordshire. I've set a target beyond the government's uplift numbers. We've had about 333 officers, I think, from the 20,000 nationally, but we're going to be aiming for 2,000 next May, which is more still, likely to exceed that. And if I've got anything to do with it, we'll be going further than that in future years as well. There's a note there around sickness levels, really encouraging reductions in sickness levels for officers and for PCSOs and police staff. I think that's actually an indication of an increased and improved morale in the service, but also that we aren't stretching those individuals to their limits. Arrest rates are up, stop and searches are up, vehicle searches are up. I think, interestingly here, 414, third round of the public confidence survey that the Chief Constable and I have commissioned, and that's showing some very, very reassuring confidence levels from people. So we're 77% of people feel they could rely on the local policing team if they needed them. That's up 5% on June last year. 65% agree the force is responding effectively to emergencies, which is up from 50%. And a key one for me, 67% have confidence in Staffordshire Police, up from 63%. Now that's a survey that we've deliberately chosen because it's already run in some other areas, some similar areas. Those improvements have not been the case in those other areas. So we're seeing, I believe, a reflection of the visibility of the local policing model and other things that the service is working so hard to deliver. There's reference in 416 to the ASB hotspot patrols. We're a few months in. That's the national pilot. We've got £1 million this year, £1 million next. Initially, officers and PCSOs. And they're in Hanley, Fenton, Stafford Town Centre, Newcastle Town Centre and Burton Urban. Going very well, that is, in terms of improved visibility. Certainly the people who are shopping out and about in those areas and indeed in the estates that we've identified welcome that, but there's also arrests and preventative stats to follow, which I think are going to be positive. I'm quite keen now that we move where we can to more areas with that, and we support the officers with community wardens. You'll be aware, Chair and panel, around the expectations of His Majesty's inspectors, particularly around effectiveness of investigations and improved contact, and both of those are detailed in the next sections. The contact handling is really going where it needs to now. 999, exactly where I want it to be, in the top dozen or so in the country. And 101 is really improved considerably as a result of the triage. The triage typically, average 7-8 minutes, deals with 60% of the calls, and 50% of those are dealt with at that point, so they don't have to carry on in the queue to a 101 call handler. We're not perfect yet. I'm still getting a few people who have had a poor experience, so we're not letting up. Right care, right person, we talked about last time briefly. This is the service's response to the national push from Health and Home Office to make sure that vulnerable people are looked after by those best trained and able to support them. And as I mentioned before, this is a very considered and careful approach in complete consultation with social care councils and the NHS. We're not rushing to do this. The Chief Constable was responsible for introducing it in Humberside, so he knows how to do it properly. Under my second heading, preventing harm and protecting people, there's some reference there to our child protection re-inspection. Some good news, some actual areas where we need to continue to work hard, and that's really underpinning an investment of around about 100 new officers in the public protection area. I myself visited our online child sexual abuse service, which was, to say the least, an eye-opener. Just incredible numbers of cases, but a really dedicated team who have some significant difficult stuff to handle. They are doing a fantastic job trying to keep our children safe online. I introduced a community safety forum which brings strategic leaders together, and then we get into a conversation with local community safety leads. Real focus this year has been on social behaviour. Previously it was around illegal trespass, and I think the key thing there, particularly for those watching, is that right across the county and city now we've got a consistency around what used to be called community triggers. So if somebody is a repeat victim of ASB, they can ask for a case review, an ASB case review, and that requires the partners to get together, get stuck in a bit earlier, and problem solve the issue. The panel will be aware of the funds I provide. A good chunk of that, 724 grand, goes to the local community safety partnerships, which are based in our councils, and there's also 10,000 each for them to tackle ASB, and we use proceeds from crime funding to also support £100,000 towards community group activity to reduce crime and prevent ASB. Safer Streets is moving on. This report references the time period of round 4. So that was 750 grand into Stafford, Burton, Newcastle and areas of Stoke. On top of the 2 million, 2.3 actually had secured in the previous 2 years. And just over the page, I'm really confident we'll be able to announce some success in round 5 in the next few days or weeks. I'll try and get this right. PSHE, yep, coordinators. They're doing a fine job supporting schools and helping actually to get a consistent delivery by PCSOs and officers that go into schools as well. And we're building that up again now after a slowdown during COVID. Serious violence duty. We had a Violence Reduction Alliance, a voluntary coming together, councils, etc., NHS and ourselves. That's now formally taken on the delivery of the serious violence duty, and there's funding and more going out, and that's having an impact. We've had a good news for you, Chairman, in Burton in particular, because we were concerned about this 12, 18 months ago. We're now beginning to see reductions in violence related to knives. An interesting stat, I believe we covered this at the public performance the other day. Knife crime in total is up because that includes the possession. Now that is not necessarily bad news. If we are stopping more people we believe are carrying a knife, that leads to a possession charge. That is good proactive policing rather than incidents involving the use of a knife. And the Chief Constable and I have come together to fund some bleed control kits, which means every vehicle now has one of those kits, which you never know, might just save somebody's life. Violence against women and girls, you can see some more progress there. I've just highlighted signs of spiking. This was about having your drink spiked if you're out and about. And I met the team up at Keele University the other day who were meeting freshers just to remind them how best to keep themselves safe and be alert. There's reference in 4212 to the missing service and child criminal exploitation and sexual exploitation. Now that will be live for a few of us who are in perhaps the county or the city council. We're looking to just firm up that piece of commissioning going forward. It's really important. 1,100 children missing. That's 497 individuals. That's just between April and June. Now, obviously there's one, some are going more than once, some go multiple times, but understanding why they've gone missing, alerting partners to potential safeguarding issues back home or the fact they're being exploited is absolutely crucial in our role together. Helen is continuing to work alongside me on the Safer Roads Partnership. I think it's fair to say, Helen, we're pretty chuffed with the progress over the last 2 years. We've got £500,000 more in for ANPR cameras. I won't be telling anybody where they are, but they're going to be all over the county and also into vehicles as well. So a good remote upgrade as well as fixed on key locations. Community speed watch is up, and we've got a new facility called Neighbourhood Speed Check, which Stoke City and county councillors will hear about imminently, because this is an opportunity for you to very quickly get a speed check on a particular location without that rigmarole of months of waiting and cables going across the road and all the rest of it, which we had to wait for in the past. It's then up to you, if it's good news, to reassure the community, and it's up to the partnership if it means the area requires additional enforcement. But it'll really move on and mean you can consider your priority communities. I'm very busy on the drug and alcohol partnership, which is new. It's about enforcement with the police, fundamentally about better treatment and recovery, because there's twice as much money gone into the city and county, their public health teams, than before. We have to show progress with that. It's got huge impacts right across the community safety chain and more widely. Space, another good year. The numbers there are staggering, really, compared with 2016. So 350 cases of ASB, youth-related ASB this year. That's 1,395 back in 2016. Now, I'm not going to claim space is responsible for that entire reduction, but it is contributing. And it's a much better picture, and they are really positive activities funded from proceeds of crime. So what's not to support in that? And there's great work being done by Prince's Trust as well, and our business crime helpline supplied by the Chamber of Commerce is encouraging and supporting businesses in terms of prevention. Actually, we've done some videos. If you've not seen those are worth trying to catch on Facebook, particularly videos about protecting your vehicles, protecting your premises, and what you can get if you need some help. As Commissioner, I get up in the morning primarily to support and help victims, and you'll see some progress there, particularly on independent sexual violence advisors, independent domestic violence advisors, imminent sign-off of the new sexual assault referral centre. Helen and I visited these a little while ago. These are very specialist places which provide a very clean space for collecting evidence, forensics, should somebody be there reporting rape or sexual assault. So really quite very high standard, very expensive as well, service in partnership with health to collect the evidence that we need to progress cases there. And our Victims Gateway, again, just April to June, 18,000 referrals. 18,000 people needing help from our commission service. There's reference there to Survive, which looks after those with sexual assault and abuse issues, hate crime, ASB Harmony, which particularly helps with the word I can never remember, when you try and get two people to talk to each other. Mediation. That's the word. And actually, with our given issues on ASB, which is not necessarily young people causing issues, although they still do in some cases. But neighbourhood disputes, issues of that sort, mediation is important, and a business crime I've referenced before. Just point out, if I may, the domestic abuse service, that's now all been recommissioned. That was a big piece of work. New Era are going again. They're also going to deliver our perpetrator services, and we're going to be finding from my budget £0.7 million more for that service over the next 3 years. Domestic abuse is up. Intervening early, supporting early, dealing with perpetrators early is absolutely essential if we're to slow down the growth and demand related to that. And there's a few references there to some partners. NHS, the Pathfinder's significant, there's a fair bit of money there, but also Staffordshire University are helping us with a piece of work around ethnically diverse victims and survivors. So I just want to move on, if I may, reducing reoffending. 4.45, I want to mention out-of-court disposals check, because I think we might come back and talk about this again. This is something that's been in my plan. I think we've got more progress to make in this area. I'm talking to the police actively about it. This is opportunities to deal with incidents without necessarily getting into the 1, 2, 3 year wait which they might have with courts at the moment. I'm particularly interested in treatment orders where people who need mental health support, perhaps support with addiction, something like that, can get that help quickly. They aren't waiting a long period of time for a court to direct them. It might be done in advance. Meanwhile, if it works for those individuals, brings down crime, then we want to be doing more of that because it reduces the pressure on the criminal justice system as well. And I'll jump ahead to the next section because the local criminal justice partnership board is now, to my mind, functioning very effectively around this. Colleagues with me have been putting pressure on the police around how long it's taking us to put, or how long it's taking them to put their investigation packs together for Crown prosecution. We've really turned that around in the last few months. But similarly, we're all there trying to understand, trying to help and applying appropriate support and pressure, particularly to courts, where we have some of the worst backlogs in the country. Now that's COVID primarily, but it's staffing numbers, it's numbers of judges, it's availability of court space. It's an area of work which isn't too headline worthy, but for me, if I'm around again, it will stay in my plan because people seeing justice done and not hanging around for years sometimes to see justice done is just not acceptable. And just stepping back, rehabilitation, finding the right housing for people, supporting people who come out of prison, these are all things that have a significant impact on reducing offending. There's some good news around the criminal justice in Staffordshire. Our guilty pleas at magistrates and court are quite high compared with other places. Now this is good news. If you've got a really robust case, good evidence to back it up, and somebody pleads guilty, the case can very quickly be progressed, and the ones where somebody is contesting, pleading not guilty, can be heard sooner. So that's sort of suggestive of good investigations, and pleased to see that we're considerably ahead of the national average in that. But there's some stuff there which I can't do, the police can't do, and it's for Ministry of Justice to do. And I think we'll hear about that a bit more in the next few years as well. So, Chairman, I hope that helps give you a sense of what's in the plan. Very happy to take any comments on it, or indeed anything that panel members know is in the plan and we've not directly addressed.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. That's really comprehensive. We do have a series of questions which colleagues will come to in a moment. But if I may just make a few observations myself before we start. When you talked about domestic violence, there are men and boys who are victims of domestic violence, and there tends to be an assumption that it's mainly female. I do hope that your strategies are including taking account of men who are victims. If I could go to domestic violence facilities, wherever the police may take what is the first stop for someone after a police intervention? And the facilities, I wonder if you could just perhaps summarise to us what sort of facilities are there. Are they sort of modern, freshly painted, homely types of environment for someone who's had a drastic experience in the marital home or the home where their partner has abused them? Are they taken to a place that makes them feel comfortable? And the point you make about antisocial behaviour, of course, I think colleagues may make a reference to that, but we don't think it's on the decline. Yeah. If you talk to parish councils, if you talk to residents and community groups, domestic violence doesn't seem to be going away. And don't want to sound too naive on an assumption that it will go away, but is enough being done? Is the neighbourhood policing model fit for purpose when it comes to dealing with antisocial behaviour? And the point you made about cases going to court and the extended period, again, coming back to domestic violence, victims don't want to relive that experience 2 years later. And it never ceases to amaze me, as a magistrate, a retired magistrate now, how cases can be extended so long when such personal circumstances are involved. Something needs to be done about that, Commissioner. If we haven't got the resource, we haven't got the resource. But it'd be interesting to know at some time how they prioritise that workload. And I hope it's done in a very strategic manner, mindful of the victims and what they may be encountering. Let me open this meeting up now to colleagues who may have questions. If you'd like to identify yourself and ask the Commissioner a question, we can proceed. Councillor Atkins.
Chair, I have a number of questions. Shall I just ask a couple and then come back later, or?
Yes, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, well, first of all, Commissioner, I was pleased in your session with the Chief Constable that he identified that there is some bad behaviour among the police force in Staffordshire and that a number of officers have been sacked. So what I wanted to have from you is a reassurance that it's a continuous process to ensure that any bad apples within the police service are rooted out and disciplined appropriately, or indeed sacked, number one. I wanted to ask you about mental health, right care, right person, because I'm aware in Staffordshire that the number of agencies on the ground dealing with mental health crises are few and far between. It's not like a big urban centre where you may have crisis intervention, in the city. So what agencies are you working with to ensure that people who do have mental health crises are seen appropriately and quickly to avoid any disastrous outcomes? Because I think that's really important. Very often the police are, the last resort. And what I'm worried about is that the police are taken out of the picture. Then that last resort is taken out of the picture and the person is left very much trying to handle the crisis themselves. So I'll leave those two first and then come back with some more questions later.
Thank you. Councillor Heaton.
Did you want me to address your points as well, or?
Yes, please.
Yeah. I'll pick up Charlotte's and then come back if I may. Councillor Atkins, excuse me. Misconduct, yeah. The Chief's completely open about situations around misconduct. The standards that he's setting are absolutely where I believe they should be. And it's quite simple. If somebody behaves inappropriately, behaves criminally, abuses their position as an officer, they will be removed. I'm very pleased that we're not in any way an outlier in terms of the numbers, and I'm comfortable with the process, and I keep quite a close eye on all of those situations. Right care, right person. I think we've still got to watch nationally how this develops. In Humberside, which was one of the pioneers of this approach, it did take a number of years to settle in. You mentioned the police being the last resort. Actually, one of the issues here is that they've become the first port of call, the first resort. And they are not the best people to be looking after somebody with a mental health crisis. Now, in the absence of anyone else, it's the police. They'll go and do it. But that's in the absence of anyone else. So we're talking to those who have the funding, and essentially the big hitters. We're talking to NHS, we're talking to the Integrated Care Board about how they're going to step up their ambulance, their 24-hour, their 7-day-a-week resilience around their patients, so that more often than not they're being looked after by the people they should be, can do that job best. Just to give you some comfort possibly, and I will keep talking about this over the next few months, as will the police service, and I'm going to a scrutiny here at the county very soon actually, to discuss it further. In Humberside, it took out about 25% of the police demand. So it's not by any means all of it. Anything involving harm or risk, the police service is still there, either in support or as the lead agency. But where you've got officers sat in A&E for hours at a time, waiting for an appropriate mental health nurse, or at a location waiting hours for an ambulance, it is really not good news. Because those officers we all want, doing the domestic violence, the antisocial behaviour, the neighbourhood crime that we expect them to be doing. But it is an emerging picture, and I'm really very conscious that it needs to be done in partnership. It has to work for the people we're trying to help here. It's not just about reducing demand on any one service.
I mean, my concern is that you talk about partnership with the NHS,
Yep.
and, you know, indeed you might rely on the ambulance service. Well, you know, if you're having to wait 12 hours for an ambulance, that's not really going to work. So my concern is that despite all the talk, there is not paritative esteem between physical health and mental health. Mental health is much more under-resourced than physical health. And without the agents on the ground, not just globally the NHS, but a response service which may exist in a city environment but doesn't really work in a town environment or a rural environment. How do people who are in crisis, because they wouldn't call the police unless they were in crisis, how do they respond? Because increasingly our community projects, which have done a great job in keeping people out of acute care, are now being underfunded or not funded, and as a result they're not there to pick up the preventative care which is so vital in keeping people who have got mental health issues on the straight and narrow. So that is my problem, is I would like to see some sort of list of agencies on the ground, not just the global NHS, but the agencies on the ground that people should be able to phone in a situation where they feel they're in crisis. So, you know, it's no point just saying, oh, well, the NHS, because that doesn't mean anything to someone who's having a problem in their home or on the street. So if this is going to work, then we actually have to have real partnership, not just talking about partnership.
Atkins, I couldn't agree with you more. I really couldn't, and that's why it's very, very important to remember that the Department of Health are also pushing this, because they want their service to respond in a different way, in a better way. Actually, a number of people with ongoing mental health concerns, but this is about other vulnerabilities as well, they will know who looks after their case, who is their expert, and they will know their local provider. The problem is that sometimes if they phone after 5 o'clock on a Friday, they don't get the support. Now, that is not necessarily a gap for the police or any other service to be filling. So we can look at the evidence in Humberside, where it's had the desired outcome for the patients or the individuals as well as the two services. And I think if you're saying you're going to join me in making sure that the communication of who people should contact and make sure that the local health partners are funding these services appropriately, then we're in the same place. It isn't going to happen overnight, but it will get us to a better place for those individuals if we keep going.
Thank you.
Very briefly on your items, yes, male victims, child victims who declare different genders, etc., are all dealt with by the service. You mentioned, I think, refuges in particular. That's not something that the police service provide as such. The county and the city now have the responsibility, actually, as a result of a change in legislation this year, for safer accommodation. And Louise and I did meet with the county team, who were saying how pleased they were to be commissioning with extra money improved provision in Staffordshire and equally in Stoke-on-Trent. I think there's 3 or 4 organisations involved, better buildings and a consistency and reliability of funding, which is good news, actually. Yeah. ASB, couldn't agree with you more. There's a perception that it continues. I think where it is continuing, particularly in public areas, that's exactly where these hotspot pilots are so important around patrolling. If the evidence is, as I suspect, that works, we're going to see more of it. And that's got to be good news. So maybe not as fit for purpose as we would like to be today, but certainly working in the right direction. And that local policing model's key, because it's as much about knowing the families and who causes trouble as anything else, and then getting in and dealing with issues rather than letting them fester in the neighbourhood issues. But I mean, quite a lot of that, as you will know, is noise, dog-related incidents, other types of antisocial behaviour, which have been, I think, more accentuated in people's minds since COVID, with more of us at home. There are issues related there. And you've talked about, the whole reason I get anxious about courts is I can't imagine what it's like for victims. And witnesses too. We get close to the witness service. Quite often justice will not conclude if you're 2 or 3 years down the line. People will feel the need to move on and cases break. So it's absolutely imperative we keep the pressure on nationally to deal with the shortcomings there.
Thank you. Councillor Leeson.
Hi. I think the councillor that spoke previously has stolen a bit of a march on me, really, because I was going to raise the question of the right person, right place. Right care, right person, sorry. My concern is that it looks as though it's going to be rolled out in February next year, which isn't that far away. And at the moment, we're not receiving any information at all that we can share with the local communities who are concerned, obviously, that there is going to be an issue when it starts being rolled out. So, given that my colleagues already raised quite a lot of the points I was thinking of, the main one really would be, is there any way that we can have some sort of a report on what the process is, what is actually going on and what the rollout entails, so that we can actually try and reassure people?
Yeah. Chairman, I think the point that the 2 councillors made is a really good one. It's not necessarily the police's role to explain how the services are going to be more present in this space, the other services. There's some areas where it's not going to work quite as we might be imagining. For example, it's very likely that the police will have experts, professionals in the contact centre to make the judgment and make the referral related to some calls. So there might be somebody who's very well placed, better than a police officer, to say that's the type of service or the support that the individual calling now needs, and almost to make that call. But I think there's something for all of us as councils around, or all of you as councils, in looking to the partners to say, well, how can we help in circulating that? Because this isn't so much about the individual self-selecting, it's about it being properly handled at the point of contact. That's where the network professionals need to be to make the appropriate choice. But it feels to me like there's room for perhaps more of the scrutiny that we're going to be doing in a few weeks to explain how it's been handled in Humberside and other areas and offer some reassurance. Because this really can only be a positive thing. There are concerns, but we're not pioneering here and we're not rushing. The introduction in February doesn't mean we'll be going full tilt in February. It could be over 2-3 years before the benefit is felt everywhere.
I think the main issue is that as councils and councillors, we're not receiving any kind of information about the rollout whatsoever, and the public perception is that the police are leading with this because they are working with other organisations. So it's just something really to demonstrate, if you like, what is going on that we can explain to the communities.
I think we always end up saying that how important communication strategy is and how useful information is. So anything you can do to ease the concerns of Councillor Leeson will be very much appreciated, I think, Commissioner. Thank you for that question. Anyone else, please? Keith?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioner. First of all, thank you for a very positive report. There's not much good news around these days, so it's nice to see some positive statistics, but you know me, I'm not just going to leave that there, am I? Two questions, if I may, please. You mentioned the public perception survey that was carried out in July, and the percentage of people who now have confidence in the police has increased from 63 to 67%, which is good news. I just wonder how much further do you think we can go with that? I don't know what the national figures are, but when you're discussing this with the Chief Constable, do you have a target in mind? Would you be happy if we got to 70 or 80? 100 is probably not very realistic, I accept that. But this is better, but how much further do you think we can go? Thank you.
Yeah, I think we need a bit more context there, don't we? And that's actually the value of this particular survey being so similar to some others elsewhere. That's not out of line with where most other places are, but some have got better numbers. Chair, I'd like to come back, if I may, and just let you know the details and perhaps some of the comparisons we've done, providing I can share the other places, but I'll give you some context anyway. The good news there is along about 12 headlines, we've done 3 surveys 6 months apart, and on every measure it's better. It's bounced a bit. Some were up considerably at Christmas time and they're down a little more this way, but in general there's a sense people better informed. The other layer we've got to it, although the numbers aren't quite so robust because of the number of people we're talking to, is around the differences from place to place. And it's really quite significant for me because if we take an example of an area like Tamworth, which is pretty low crime, big reductions in crime in some areas, but the perception there is probably the lowest in the county. And yet areas where we've got high crime, the perception and the confidence levels are higher. So there are definitely nuances and differences in how the public are receiving or whether they're getting the information they need, the forums, the engagement, the communications are right around what we're doing as well. So it's really very informative. I think there was more detail in the public performance pack, which showed the 3 scales. But I take your point about, is that good, great, or indifferent? At the minute, I'm just trying to get the thing going in the right direction. And it was very important that we had some way of establishing public perception of what we were doing locally, rather than waiting for a 1 or 2 year lag on ONS crime figures and things like that.
Yes, one more, please.
Just one, I promise. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to follow the meeting you had with the Chief Constable last week, and I haven't yet found the link online, but that's my technical ignorance, I guess. So bear with me, if I perhaps should know better on this, but in that meeting you're holding the Chief Constable to account, and there's lots, as we say, good news here, positive news, and I just wondered, which are the areas where you've been disappointed in the Chief and the Force in what they've done, areas where they could do much better or a little bit better? You know, this is all the good news. Which are the areas you're focusing on where you think, come on, we need to do better? And secondly, does the Chief agree with those areas with you so that you two can work in harmony on it? Thank you.
Yeah, it's not all discourse, it's not all complete agreement, and everything's great. I mentioned out-of-court disposals. I think we're some way off what we should be doing there. And there's training, there's officers knowing the potential for that, in my opinion, and there's making sure we've got the right treatment offers, referrals in place. I think there's room for improvement there, but I know that's been worked on. I'm still not satisfied with 101 averages. Everybody at the service knows that, because I go on about it all the time. I'm concerned that whilst a lot of places are suffering with vehicle crime, the south of our county has been hit again this summer. But we've got and we did discuss this at the public performance meeting, the specialist investigation team's back on that. 100 arrests now in about 6 months from that team. So there are areas where I think we're not where we should be, and let's be frank, His Majesty's inspectors, whilst they're very encouraged by progress, they're not quite ready to release their area of concern around investigation. I think they might be closer on contact. So there's an ongoing dialogue, and we do discuss some of those things in the forum. We also try and explain some as well. So whilst there appeared to be a big increase in violent crime, that's largely down, in fact nearly entirely down, to a change in crime recording about non-fatal strangulation. So part of the job there is to reassure the public, but also to show the process I go through, and where there's actually it's quite right that it's for the Chief to deliver here. We're setting expectations, it's for him to deliver, and to see the open and transparent way that I'm trying to do that. But we ain't an outstanding police force yet, and until we get there I won't be entirely happy. Mind you, I don't think the Chief Constable will be either.
Thank you. Councillor Heason, do you want to come back?
Oh, it's just a comment really. I just wanted to say how successful under the Straighter Streets Fund initiative we got the funding for the safer spaces in Newcastle, and what a success it's been with a safer space for women when they're out, or anybody else that's vulnerable when they're out on a busy evening in Newcastle. We've got street pastors, we've got first aid responders. It's just been a real success.
Thank you for that. Councillor Atkins.
Thank you, yeah. A couple of areas which don't get mentioned very often. I mean, you talk here about the business crime helpline, but I'm concerned about the increasing pressure and abuse of shop staff during the cost of living crisis. And what is done about ensuring that there is a police response to that. I appreciate that some supermarkets may not want to report that because of reputational damage, but it is an increasing problem. And then the other area which is increasing, certainly nationally if not locally, is disability hate crime. So I'd like to know what the local force is doing to address both those issues. And a quick question for the Deputy Commissioner about the Safer Roads Partnership. One of the issues that I get picked up in my patch is the fact it becomes very well known that certain safety cameras are not operational, and in fact are not operational not just for a few weeks, but a few months, even years in certain circumstances. So I want an assurance that the cameras will be rotated to ensure that areas which have become areas where people know that the cameras don't work, that they are then installed and working. I don't know what percentage of safety cameras are actually live. Maybe you could tell me that. But I do think it's important that you don't get into a situation where everyone knows locally that the speed cameras just aren't operational. They are a deterrent, but they're no longer a deterrent if everyone knows locally that they don't work.
Chairman, thanks. Are you comfortable with Helen
Yes,
taking some of that with me? Great,
yes,
thank
please.
you. Just on the shop abuse, I've been quite close to this for the last 2 or 3 weeks because it really is a national issue, as you said, if not locally, nationally. The good news is it's not particularly a local issue, but that doesn't mean there aren't incidents. I was in on a group of independent retailers. There's a federation that represents them, and they all had a bad experience. It's really unfortunate that you get individuals who are threatening shop staff and people who aren't in a position to step away from it. What we haven't seen, thank goodness, is the much of the organised crime that is sort of sweeping whole rows of or whole sets of shelves in supermarkets to such a degree that supermarket security don't feel it's safe to tackle them. So that they'll often just go through a town from supermarket to supermarket, threatening people, filling up their van, and then they're back to sell it in their local pubs and things like that. And that is not anything to do with cost of living. That's organised criminality. And anybody out there who's being offered something cheap, if they're buying it, they're feeding that sort of criminality, which is the worst possible thing. So we are staying close to that, and in fact I've just asked for some revised statistics because there's some sort of action week on business crime nationally in the next fortnight, and I want to be sure of our position that it's not out of sync. But I've also been in touch with a couple of large supermarket chains. In some places they're talking about ways in which they can support the police, so they will, I don't know, maybe offer them space to work from, etc. Some of the offers they're making, I think, wouldn't go down too well with the public, quite frankly, like they'll do the shopping for the police. Look, if there's a shoplifting incident and we've got some evidence, the police will be there to prosecute and investigate anyway. Nobody needs encouragement, and it's not something I can support, quite frankly. But I think we've got to wait and see. That a lot of the pressures around potentially raising the legislation, raising the potential for higher sentences and things for shop workers who've been abused. So it's certainly something that MPs are seeing as well, because I can't do anything about the legislation. So just on the cameras, I didn't mention on SSRP, we've got 4 new safety vans. We've got new cameras going into those that do poor light. So dawn and dusk type stuff will be easier to do, which is quite good news, because that's when the rat runners are causing us all a problem. The Roads Partnership doesn't disclose percentages on cameras. There are some new digital cameras going in the next few months at considerable expense, actually, with income from the training courses that we offer people as opposed to a fine. Helen, any more on the cameras?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say, it's not all about cameras. You know, we've obviously got camera vans, we've got these new ones that will be working at dusk, but we've also got roads policing unit that go out and do speed enforcement. We've got the Central Motorway Police Group does exactly the same. We've got specials that do it, and we've got local officers. So at any one time, there's lots of enforcement going on. So I wouldn't wish speeding on anybody.
I don't think in Staffordshire we'll ever get back to a point where every one of those housings has necessarily got a live camera in. And they never did in the first place. It was a rotation before. But the financial return, which I thought was wrong when those cameras all went in 15 odd years ago, means that we got more cameras than hotspots. But the value of the housings is still considerable. People do modify their behaviour, and also the value of this new neighbourhood hotspot facility that you will have is you might well identify what today is a hotspot that wasn't known to the service, and where they can, they will consider a van. There are some locations where you simply can't house a van safely. There's verges or it's narrow roads, etc. And that's where all the other wider enforcement options come in. Prosecutions and enforcements can continue to be at a very high level. I think they were getting on for 50,000 again in the last 12 months. So speed at your peril.
Disability, hate crime?
Oh, excuse me. Yes. Now, I actually commission a hate crime support service. I'm not aware of disability hate crime being a particular high-profile issue in terms of crime numbers. Happy to look into that. If you've got any particular examples you're concerned about, perhaps you could drop me a line with those on.
Leonard Cheshire Charity have identified Leonard Cheshire Charity have identified a rise in disability hate crime, which often can involve violence. And I have to say from personal experience, my daughter is a wheelchair user, and abuse is fairly common. Admittedly, she doesn't live in Staffordshire. She lives in Birmingham. But, you know, hate crime is pretty much a regular occurrence. It might be on public transport when you're trying to board a bus, possibly. And in that case, sadly, you might actually get it from the bus driver. But, you know, hate crime does tend to be, you know, a regular experience of people who either are neurodivergent or wheelchair users, or in other ways have a disability through whatever means whatsoever. So, you know, it is an issue, and I do think it's important that when you have a local police force, that they are aware of that experience and have a strategy for dealing with it.
This week, Helen and I visited Stafford, and Giles Parsons, Chief Inspector there, is now the lead for the force around hate crime. He's just reviewing the hate crime policies and making sure that staff officers are exactly trained, as you say. I'm not denying for a moment it happens. I'm not aware that it's a particular issue in Staffordshire or a growing one, but I'm going to take that as a bit of homework, and I'll find out, see if there's a blip of any. It's just totally unacceptable, isn't it?
One of the problems is, of course, it's often not reported because it becomes so usual, such a normal part of life, that it's not reported.
Yeah. Just going back to what Helen was talking about, we share your concerns about road traffic accidents, Commissioner, and we're very, very keen to see as much monitoring as possible in place. I've recently been reading about the incidents now of cyclists and motorcyclists that are suffering at the hands of irresponsible drivers who were speeding. So speeding, I think, is normally associated with road traffic accidents. So the sooner we can get the measures you described, that your deputy described, the better, I think. Anyway, let's move on now. Councillor Maycock.
Thank you, Chair. Good one first. I like what you've wrote about Catch-22. I had the chance to speak to them at an event in Tamworth a couple of weeks back. But one thing they did say, they were struggling to get places to have the interviews with the individuals that have gone missing. So I think if a bit more could be done on that to facilitate them to have the interviews in a safe place with the individuals. On the SSRP, I've identified with residents a couple of hotspots that there's been some quite serious accidents. No fatalities, thank God as yet. But speaking to the county council, they've literally just directed me to this SSRP and to get people to put the speeding concerns on there, whereas my proposal would have been for traffic calming. So if people are just going to continue the speeding here, I was able to get the Chief Inspector to come out and do a bit of speed watch on there. But if some of your team would be willing to come up there and have a look, that'd be brilliant.
And this is why it's a partnership, because sometimes the solution is engineering. In fact, it might be there's accidents because there's a dangerous piece of road, dangerous camber or some poor lights or something. So the highways from the city and county are in on that partnership. We've also got National Highways and others who are considering it in the wider piece. And it sort of goes to what the chairman was saying. It is often speeding that's linked to accidents. It's not always. It's sometimes people who've just had they've had a heart attack, they've had some sort of health problem. And I think from last week, from memory, the stats about, I think, getting on for 30, just tragic numbers. I think 5 were pedestrians, and about a quarter of the accidents were motorbikes. So there are certain target groups that we keep working with in terms of training, education and so on, as well as enforcement. I'd be interested actually, I take it as county councillors, city councillors, you've not yet had advice on how to do this hotspot, this community neighbourhood thing. Okay, we'll just rejig that, because I think it's a real tool in your a real option in your toolbox to say to a community, actually it might not be speeding, we've got something else going on here. But the team are always there to advise around accidents and the nature of the accidents and just help. The other thing that Helen quite rightly pointed out last week with the chief, drink driving, drug driving, it's still a major problem. And then you've got people on their phones and all the rest of it. It's just not on. All accidents waiting to happen.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to see that the officer uplift programme is ahead of schedule. That's fantastic news for the force. The consequence, though, of employing a fairly large number of people in a short space of time is that there will be a lack of experience. And I suspect that a fairly high proportion of operational officers now are pretty inexperienced officers. Is there any correlation between that and some of the issues that the inspectorate have picked up around effectiveness of investigations and some of the issues that have been raised in the meeting today?
I think the chief's probably better placed to answer that, but he's sort of attempted to do so in the last couple of, certainly last week he referenced it. A good chunk of those new recruits are now through their 3-year training period. But as we grow and maintain numbers, as people retire as well, we are going to have an ever younger police service. And in some ways it's a good thing, because they bring in a whole set of skills that those of us who are a bit older don't have. But equally, they don't necessarily have the experience, the streetwise, some of the communication skills. So everybody is aware that training, supporting, where possible, giving experience to the new recruits is really important. It's part of the challenge. Nobody says I don't want the extra officers, but it's just a reality that bringing everyone to a point of experience is not possible when they simply need time to get there. Around your point on investigations, I think possibly less so. There is some training and experience there in terms of the initial case reporting and so on. But the area of focus for the service, which is referenced in here, is around supervisors, making sure that sergeants, supervisors, you'll know this yourself, are in a position to have enough time to support their teams, their recruits, and make the appropriate decisions on what next in terms of putting together a good case file. And in fact, part of the word, Mr. Bowen mentioned earlier something I wasn't happy with. I really wasn't happy with us taking 100 odd days to put files together for CPS. Now, there are some issues there. It's got more and more difficult. You have to, can't remember what it's called again, where you redact individuals out of photographs and some evidence. Everything needs a file before it can be considered for charge now. But even so, if other places can do this in 30, 40 days, why can't we? So actually understanding as a young officer what makes a good case file is also essential training, essential experience. And if a supervisor spots that somebody's not got it right, they've got the time to do that. So it's probably more around actually not the newbies, but those supervisors having the capacity and time, and there's a lot being done to make sure they do, to focus on that part of the job.
Thank you. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to refer, really update as well, the panel in terms of the activity of referenced in 4.29 regarding knife crime. And you, in your report, you state that the knife bins were stationed in Lichfield and Burntwood. You know, Commissioner, I'm pleased to report, in one respect, that one of the locations, within 6 weeks of being installed, had over 100 blades deposited. And that probably tells me, in a sense, no, a lot of them may be domestic people thinking, how do I dispose of a knife? And it goes in there. We accept that. But the fact that they're going in there actually does say they're off the streets or they're not dumped somewhere, etc., where they then can be used. So in terms of the work behind it, I think it justifies in itself the work that you've done, Commissioner, in ensuring the funds were available for us to explore that. And I thank you. And I think you refer to the bleed control kits. That was one of our activities in terms of the 4 weeks the Knife Angel was in Lichfield, that we had retailers getting trained up. And again, I would urge any authority or anybody to do that, because it really is beneficial. It can save lives and does save lives. So I think it's invaluable work that's being done there, and I commend obviously that going forward to any other authority if they choose to do it.
Briefly, I think Lichfield did a fantastic job with the Knife Angel. I think Stoke did a year or so ago as well. The key is the education work, raising awareness with children, with families and so on. But the knife bins were successful, and I was in on one of those sessions with the volunteers. And so that's some stores, some quite big chains actually, are taking them in so that their staff are in a position to offer that urgent first aid as well. On the very, very rare occasion it happens, but, you know, better to have the opportunity.
Yeah, you mentioned the education. Over 2,000 children from primary to secondary were reached out to, either visits to the schools in that leading up to the Knife Angel and afterwards. And certainly the response of them really does say it all. So again, I'm very, very thankful that you were able to help us facilitate that great piece of work.
Thank you. Are there any more questions on the crime plan? No? I'll go to agenda item 7 then, the Fire and Rescue Service document, please. Commissioner?
Thanks, Chairman. This is a slightly different document. This is actually a statutory obligation. It's also known as the Integrated Risk Management Plan. So this is the safety plan, which is going to span through to 2024 from the Fire and Rescue Service. I think the first thing here is about flexible and responsive service, and the focus on on-call availability. And we touched on this, I believe, at an earlier panel, and I'm sure we'll do so again. But particularly want to draw your attention under section 4.1 there. We're looking at getting on for a dozen different areas of the experience for what we call retained or on-call firefighters. These are individuals who give their time. They may well be sat at a birthday dinner or Christmas or something, and they get a bleep and off they go to try and save somebody's life. Phenomenal, really, and they have to commit a considerable amount of hours, but some of the sort of parameters around that don't quite meet modern society. For example, how far they might be from a location, how many hours they can commit, and then there's also the actual experience of particularly them getting trained up quickly enough and staying with the service because they feel they are making a difference. And we've had a number of on-call firefighters who have become frustrated actually not being deployed or on the run, as they call it, not being on the run as often as they feel they could be in order to offer some support at an incident. So we're looking at a bunch of stuff there around hours, training, recruitment and retention, and those turn-in times. And I think some of those we'll be taking forward under the Chief Fire Officer's advice for next year. And the big one there is what we call three-person crewing. Now, a three-person crew is not considered sufficient for a team that arrive first at an incident to tackle or to go in particularly to a building. But there's a tremendous amount they can do to secure the site, make it safer. We had a very unfortunate situation only recently where somebody tackled his own fire in a shed and unfortunately has passed away as a result of burns he sustained. Now, a crew of 3 would be in a position to stop, or as far as possible, if they're there, perhaps prevent somebody making that bad decision themselves. So they can secure an area in readiness for a team of 4, and they can support a team that's following on. And quite often there's 2 or 3 teams at incidents. The key for me there, and it picks up, I think, on a question from Councillor Atkins when we last discussed this, we've gone to the service and we've asked the firefighters themselves about this. And the commitment was, if you don't want to do it, we won't do it. But 67% of those who responded were in favour. In fact, only 23% were against. So this is big, big support for this. And that's not just the retained and on-call firefighters. It is also asked the question of our whole-time teams. So whilst there's some national resistance to this, although it's policy in many other areas already, we're going to continue with the pilot and see if it's right for Staffordshire. I've got to say, folks, I am very interested in Staffordshire. I'm quite frankly not so interested in the Fire Brigade Union's view in London, Manchester or anywhere else. I'm interested in Staffordshire. And if this means we've got more people at incidents, more teams, more availability, particularly in rural areas, we're going to give it very, very serious consideration. Similar to that, 4.16 talks about this roving appliance. This is actually some work we're doing in partnership with West Mids, and also keeping teams effectively, bringing them in South Staffs so that they can respond without having to be called out. South Staffordshire is one of the areas we have particular need for the retained teams. That's a pilot we're just going to go again with for 6 months because didn't really get enough data from the first go. You'll know about the Falls Response Team. This is firefighters helping people who've fallen, and the ambulance service we mentioned before might be a while. In this case, sometimes hours. Our fire team are there helping people up wherever possible, getting them back into bed, keeping them out of hospital and in constant touch with health professionals. And there's some more opportunities for us to assist the NHS with their winter pressures, which I'm hoping to hear about before the end of the month. Be good news, that would. We've got the University of Chester just having a look at that piece of work for us on falls, because it's getting national interest. Protecting people in places, that's another headline from my plan. A lot of this is enhanced fire safety and building safety work as a result of Grenfell. The team are doing very well in terms of the percentages, the numbers they're getting out to sea. Please excuse me. Over the page, on page 32, we're back right at there doing more home fire safety visits. What's that? February to August, 7,500 visits. Fantastic. Now, I think I've said to you before, for me, that's not a competition about how many you do. It's, are those the right households? Are they the most vulnerable households? Are they the ones where people aren't looking after their own interests and concerns, but perhaps it's people that would struggle to look after themselves? And I'm keeping an eye on the just how vulnerable the people are that we're targeting. I'd rather see fewer but the right people, quite frankly. There's an item there about safeguarding. This is something Fire and Rescue have taken on board. Following some national issues, there'll be more DBS disclosures and more training. And there's references there to a number of activities that the fire service is taking around prevention and education. I just want to note one, if I may. I can't believe this, but it's 5 years this year since Ryan Evans, a young lad, drowned at Westport Lake up in Stoke-on-Trent, near to Tunstall, actually. I'm very familiar with that piece of water. So the fire service team went there. Actually, Helen, you and I visited our water experts, didn't we? We did. Where was that? Newcastle or... Oh, we're in danger of getting something wrong there. But we've got a water specialist team, and they were scrambled, actually, to because some young people had jumped into the river at Burton. This is a tragic case of that young man, and his father was there, and there was some training and support just around trying to encourage people not to just take every caution around open water. Got some highlights here on the progress we're making with HMI on page 34 and 35. You can see that the areas for improvement have been completed and signed off, and we're very close to finishing that on some national recommendations that have come out of HMI as well. HMI are reasonably new to fire. A few years in, I think it's an exceptionally positive thing. I don't think everything HMI do is right. I think they have some slightly odd priorities. But I think in terms of consistency, being able to compare your service with others across the country, having a real sense of what good looks like is absolutely imperative. And there's a reference at the top of page 34 there. Our next visit is a thematic one, actually around misconduct, which was mentioned earlier. In this case, there's been, again, one or two issues in various places around the country. So they're looking at not only the processes around misconduct, but also asking myself and my colleagues to just explain how we are engaged in monitoring that. And Louise and I talk in our 2x2s and governance boards and actually keep an eye on every individual case through the Fire and Rescue Service. Just want to mention here an error, actually, Chairman, 447. We are going to have more co-location of police and fire in fire service, really good buildings in really good places to respond from. We're going to move forward with, we've done the one in Chase Terrace, we're going to move forward with one in Kidsgrove, Uttoxeter, Stone. Now that should, I believe, be Kinver, not Wombourne, because we've already got, now I've got to be careful here, Wombourne or Wombourne? Wombourne, apologies. That's Kinver. And Penkridge. Now, this is good news because these are essentially posts for the police to respond from, and people will recognise that some of those areas are likely to be busy but a little bit too far from the main station. The following section, just to remind us, we've got to save some money, about £1.4 million. We're making progress with that, but we're not quite there. We've got about 1.25 identified, and I'm waiting for some detail. There's also areas for investment. We need some kit, we need some training, various other bits and pieces that I'm waiting for the service just to bring me up to speed on. I think that pretty much covers that, Chairman, actually, but it's a useful document because it summarises some of the key areas that fire and rescue are staying focused on, but also those areas for me which are not necessarily their core job, but they're very well placed to help with, like supporting the NHS.
Yeah. Yes, it's quite a lengthy statement regarding the fire service. When I started to read this, paragraph 412, recruitment, retention, 120 days currently.
Yeah.
Just to get to the point rather than waffle on, I don't get a sense of pace. If you're hoping to deliver the activities detailed in section 4.2 and onwards, you need the staff.
Yeah.
Now, can you give us any assurances that pace is being applied to this, that they are working fairly quickly and effectively to get the right people in the right places as soon as possible? Because we don't want any gaps, I don't think, on this sensitive topic, do we, in terms of safety of people in their homes and buildings, of course.
Chairman, I totally agree with you. It's, in fact, it's not just a problem with the fire and rescue service at the moment because of vetting requirements, and that's partly the issue here, the new obligations. Sometimes it's taking us months to recruit. In fact, it's taking us months after we've made a job offer. In some cases, and for very real reasons, people have to go and pick up an opportunity somewhere else. So that's a totally achievable day, 40 days, and something there about the cycling and the way they recruit in batches rather than having an ongoing rolling process. But there's a whole bunch of things here that, for me, one or two of these are almost no-brainers. And the question is, well, why now, and why haven't we just been doing this anyway? That's part of the conversation that we're having. Across the lot, we are going to be bringing more people in, and then most importantly, keeping them. Because if it takes a long time to recruit them, and then it takes a year or so to fully train them, it's equally not quick enough.
I think the NHS have had a similar problem, recruitment and retention. And retention is a challenge at times, isn't it? Okay, let me ask colleagues if they have any questions for the Commissioner on the fire board. Councillor Atkins.
Yeah, I have a number of questions. First of all, on the issue of recruitment, how diverse are the people who are recruited, both in terms of gender and other diversity? Number one, because clearly I know that having attended an event at my local fire station that they were calling out for women firefighters, but the culture has to be right if women firefighters are going to be recruited. Secondly, you mentioned the 3-person crewing. Was the feedback from firefighters collected anonymously so that they could be absolutely sure that they were saying what they thought? Number 3, you talk here about the falls response team. Having seen a couple of falls in my locality 2 or 3 months ago, I'm interested to establish how they can say that someone who's fallen is not injured, because there were 2 people who fell in Leek, attended by, luckily, by a retired nurse. She didn't know whether they were injured or not. One had a broken hip and the other one had a broken ankle. And neither of those was clear at the time of these 2 ladies lying on the ground, and they weren't particularly elderly, but I don't think anyone could have said, yeah, that there were no injuries. So I think that's important. And yes, what is the plan? I mean, this summer has been incredibly wet, so we haven't had many wildfires. But what is the fire service plan for wildfires, that we are likely to have more in the future? Is there a plan? Where could one find that plan? Particularly, obviously, where I am in the Moorlands, we've had the Roaches devastated by fire in the past. So what is the plan of the fire service? Thank you.
Yes, recruitment, and I mean, there's a recognition nationally and locally that the service does not really represent the diversity of the population. With policing, you'll be aware, I think our new recruits are 54% female. Now that's a chunk of new people that are going to considerably change what the police service looks like in a very short period of time. Because of the nature of our fire service recruitment, which is as people leave, we replace them, it's going to take some time longer. But only this week I was having a deep conversation, not just with the Chief Fire Officer, but actually with some of the workforce, who was one individual very keen to tell me about his thoughts around diversity, and really good conversations. The key is to make sure that these opportunities are very well promoted. We're educating out in colleges, out where people are, every community, encouraging them, making sure they recognise actually that the opportunities are there for them in the fire and rescue service. We just launched a new whole-time firefighter recruiting scheme. Going to be interested to see the numbers that get through to the last phase of that. And I've no doubt at all that we're going to continue to see certainly more women and more people from ethnic minorities in the fire service. But it is going to take some time. It isn't. This isn't about positive discrimination. It's about making sure everyone feels there's an opportunity. And you're already seeing a change in our management, our staffing, and our executive teams with some
Can we have the
excellent
figures?
people.
Can we have the figures to the panel?
Yeah, be very happy to bring the figures. In fact, I will do that at the next meeting. It's something I report on every year anyway to you, but we'll continue to do that. With the falls, this is something we have heard occasionally from those in the service who aren't actually involved in the falls prevention team. Nervousness, understandable, I think. Firstly, are they insured? Have they been properly trained? Have they got the right support from health professionals if they need it? The answer is absolutely yes, because otherwise they ain't going to go on those calls. Will there occasionally be an error in the judgment by the health contact team? Possibly. But far better that you've got two trained people there to make an assessment, and they are in dialogue with the health service at the scene within half an hour, than somebody is lying there. There was one in Leek last year. Gentleman lay on his front step for 8 hours, hypothermia, and really nearly lost his life. So for somebody to be there in a position to make an informed judgment and offer their support, very occasionally there's going to be a situation, I think, where the initial assessment isn't correct, but the team are trained to handle that. And I think, can't remember the number, it's over 500 incidents we've been to, 548 incidents now they've been to. So that's a lot of people who potentially would have been a lot worse off but for the visit.
What worries me is that, you know, what we're trying to do is patch the holes in the ambulance service. You know, clearly the fire service does a whole range of things, but, you know, to expect the fire service to effectively cover for the ambulance service, with some absolutely appalling response rates. I mean, I know that on one particular fall, someone who fell and I think broke her ankle and couldn't, and I think possibly hit her head as well. You know, the retired nurse was told it was going to be 5 hours before, and this was after 2 hours, that she was going to be collected by an ambulance. So in that situation, they took the decision, possibly, I don't know, in the circumstance it was the right decision, but they managed to carry her flat into a Range Rover so that she was able to keep her legs flat. But, you know, in some circumstances that could be absolutely the wrong decision. And it worries me that we're now effectively saying the ambulance service is not fit for purpose, therefore we have to use whoever to fill the gaps. And, you know, I don't think that's the way we should be looking at our emergency services. We should be expecting our ambulance service to get to places within a reasonable time span. And it seems to me like this is a sticking plaster to fix a really, really serious problem.
Through you, Chairman, I think it's more than sticking plaster. I think it's a really genuine positive thing when the alternative isn't available. Now, if the fire service didn't have the capacity and the ambition, the appetite to do this, they simply wouldn't. I mean, you could not ask the same of the police at the moment, and it's almost the reverse of the right care, right person. There isn't capacity in the police to support health issues in that way. There is in the fire and rescue service, and they are commissioning us to do it. This is not it's not an unfunded project. It will help me retain firefighters, retain fire staff in the organisation, which is also in the interests of them as well as the wider public. I have my own views, Chairman, on whether commissioners would be a good idea in health services. I think they would, actually. I'm a bit busy right now. If Councillor Atkins wants to offer herself as Health Commissioner for Staffordshire, I might back her. But I think there are some problems there and they need some proper solutions. If one of them is asking a professional organisation like Fire and Rescue to help them at very much less than they can sort the problem themselves, then it's got a thumbs up from me.
Okay. Are there any more questions for the Commissioner? Councillor Cox.
The wildfires plan.
Interestingly, wildfires is a word that's mentioned in my my speech when I took this job on, because wildfires, climate change, very real issues for us in Staffordshire. Touchwood, there hasn't been quite the same number that we've had in recent years. The one in the Roaches was burnt for several days, if I remember right. But there have been a few around the area and they are increasing. Staffordshire have got new equipment, special lightweight equipment, which means they can get onto sites, onto countryside, rural areas, without having to carry very heavy gear. They can stay there for longer as well. And there is quite a comprehensive piece of work around maintaining their ability to respond. Also, part of that is working with farmers and others around having equipment that means we can connect, or the service can connect to their bowsers and water supplies with connectors.
Adapters.
Yeah, which aren't always the same. So there's some real practical stuff there, because quite often the landowners are aware of the risk and ready to help as well.
Thank you. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm interested in the 4.3, the help most at risk stay safe. I mean, obviously, you're stating there between February and August 23, over 7,500 visits completed. That is encouraging, but Staffordshire is a very large county. And I'm also concerned, in a sense, it's also a very rural county. And it's really making sure that we are getting coverage that really gives it a meaningful test rather than just obviously glossing the figures. I don't want to sound disingenuous with my question, but I do think we should be able to assess exactly how that benefits our residents throughout the county.
Chairman, that's a really good question, and actually goes to what I was saying earlier about making sure we're visiting the right places. Being isolated, being rural, it sort of ticks you up in the vulnerability risk level. Being old, having some sort of infirmity, multi-storey properties, all those things should be part of the targeting. Ideally, it would be supported with NHS data as well, as to where we know people have got risks. Far too many fires relate to people who smoke or consume too much alcohol, unfortunately, and it results in accidents. So I'm quite keen. I'm going to pick up on that. I'll ask a question of the team around where and localities, but I'm going to be doing work on this because with the HMI inspection next year, part of their challenge was around what they perceived to be a drop-off in these numbers during COVID. I quite frankly don't know how they thought we were going to do it during COVID, but all the same. What I would like to be very comfortable with is that we're doing actually way more than many other places, but they're also the right places and right households, right vulnerable people to be visiting.
Thank you. Councillor Meikle.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at your comments around the retained stations, and like you mentioned in South Staffordshire, they're not being used as much as they could be, mainly because of recruitment. So could the stations be used for any community services while they're not being used as a fire station?
Generally they are. Part of the original design was that they would have community spaces, and most of them have got groups going in quite regularly. I am conscious in one or two places, I mentioned a couple earlier, where we're going to be housing some police provision in as well. That means that some of the community work won't be able to continue there. So what we'll do is the service will be looking for alternative locations and helping the groups find somewhere more suitable. Fundamentally, for me, they are for provision of service. But yeah, where there's opportunities, we use the spaces for community work as well.
Okay, thank you. Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. Section 4.2 talks about building inspections. First of all, can you help me out because I don't understand? The BSR, the Building Safety Regulator, if I read it correctly, gets involved in buildings that are at least 18 metres high or have 7 stories. But before that, we talk about building regulation consultations and the fire safety audits. So my first question is, I don't know if you'll know this, but whether that group also are looking at buildings at least 7 stories high, or is that a wider group of buildings, such as commercial premises and the like? So that's the first question, really, to explain that, if that's possible. And secondly, the fire safety audits, 213 were done in a 7-month period, of which 27 were unsatisfactory. On the surface, that looks a bit worrying, that 10% of buildings fail to meet basic regulations. I don't know if I've read that correctly. And secondly, 213, as ever with these numbers, in context, is that a very low number or a very high number? Is it a performance we would regard as good or sufficient, or should it be better, and could it be better? Bearing in mind the explanation in here, that the involvement also with the building regulation consultants is impacting the time available for fire safety audits. So I hope I've explained that okay. If you can help, thank you.
I'll try, Mr. Bowen. You're in danger of stretching my knowledge here, but actually I look in detail at this in our performance meetings, and the public performance, next one with the Chief Fire Officer, I think is in December, And these sorts of things are in the stats with some trends which will help you with that comparative information. It's a slightly different document, this one. My understanding is fire safety audits are a much wider group of buildings because under times of pressure they're very careful to prioritise places like care homes, things of that nature. The building safety regulator, this is still developing really, some of the regulation here. That is more so aimed at higher risk buildings, so that's 7 stories as specified on the page 32 overleaf. So that's the stuff that's particularly been subject to change as a result of the tragedy at Grenfell. But fire safety audits, it's a big piece of work, and I think one thing to pull out from there, you'll notice there's been 10 enforcement notices. The service are very much in a place now where if people aren't taking advice, then they're going to get done, because it's just too important that this is dealt with. And there have been some commercial enterprises, hotels, things like that, that were under an absolute strict requirement to undertake the work that the fire service were telling them to do.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I guess my worry is that if we take you mentioned the 10 enforcement notices, you know, how widely does that cover the picture? Is that hopefully not the tip of an iceberg, or is it the fact that we've done a very comprehensive set of surveys and we've got a handle on it? And again, don't expect you to answer that, please, right now, but do you understand where I'm coming from? Is how indicative, how do we understand the flavour of where we are with this? And it's a big challenge for the fire service, I do respect that, but have they really been able to get a handle on this? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I know 10 enforcement notice. Well, I know the enforcement is it's actually in a different scale to what it's been in recent years. There's an increased appetite for that. However, I think similarly to your other questions, we need more context when we're putting stats down. I'll make sure they're in the next public pack, and then you get a copy of that and we can pick up again.
Right. Just on that point, I think we would always benefit from a narrative or a commentary to supplement the facts, the figures in the box. So we'd be very appreciative of that, Commissioner. Just one last point then on this report. 4410 talks about volunteers, and we all know how the volunteers in the UK stepped up during the pandemic. It was a very, very interesting statement here about maximising the use of volunteers. Is there anything you can say about whether you intend to extend the volunteer contribution into the service?
Well, firstly, thank you to all the volunteers. Quite a number of them support us with things like the open days, and those have been really popular this year. Having missed out during COVID, there's been a lot of families going to station open days, things of that nature. And it includes chaplains there as well, who are tremendous support. My view is we need to find a way for anybody who wants to volunteer, and wherever possible, accommodate that enthusiasm. I'm not too close to the plans to exactly, well, there's a review. That might be an item we could discuss at a future panel meeting, what the review is proposing.
Yeah, so I think we'd appreciate a bit more clarity around that, Commissioner, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Are there any more questions for the Commissioner on this part of the meeting? No, right, thank you. Item 8 on the agenda are members' questions. I think we've had a good range of questions this afternoon. Are there any more? Councillor Maker.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner. You put a comment on Facebook the other day about a comment that had been placed on by a candidate for the election in Tamworth. Could you just explain a bit about that? Has there been, is anything secured, or is it just a bit of a misleading comment?
Just so the panel are aware, there was a comment on social media, a promise being made about public-facing desk at a police station. Now, at the moment, those decisions are made by the Chief Constable, and I may inform a decision like that through my police and crime plan. They're not decisions that can be made by individual MPs or MP candidates or anybody else, or parties actually. So if that's the clarity you're looking for, the nature of our contact and how we spend our money, the priorities are set by myself and the Chief Constable.
Thank you. Okay. Right, thank you. Okay. Well, item 9 on the agenda is future meetings. The next meeting is November the 13th, 10 a.m. And I think we'll be looking at budget in that context. Before I close the meeting, I'd like to make one final statement, if I may. Today is Mr. Keith Walker's last meeting. And I understand he's been with us since, is it 2012, Keith? Day one? So, right, 2015. And I can't tell you how much we've valued your contribution during that time. And I'd like to thank you on behalf of the panel for outstanding work that you've given to this panel. And maybe wish you all the very best for the future. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thoroughly enjoyed the 8 years that I've been part of the panel. Worked with some excellent people, and there have been challenges along the way, but I must say probably the last 2 to 3 years has been a change of approach. With the new fire officer, with the new Chief Constable, Chris Noble, I'm very reassured that in years to come, certainly Staffordshire Police will be there again amongst the most best performing forces in the country. So I look forward to celebrating that.
You didn't have grey hair when you joined, did you?
I didn't.
Yeah,
Like
well,
a prison sentence, isn't it?
okay, well, thank you once again, and thank you. At that point, I'll close the meeting, and thank you all for your attendance. Thank you, Commissioner, and your team. Thank you.